Well, Mariam, let me come back to you now. Some are of the opinion that the bill has something to do with the 2019 elections. Do you agree?
So, like Samson mentioned, this bill is a, monumental movement for our democracy as a nation. Young people have to be involved in the political process. So youth need to participate, and there are different ways to participate. People come out to vote, people come out to campaign for people they believe in and support parties that, have similar ideologies to them. And so when you say this bill is going to pass before 2019 and it will be effective during the 2019 elections, first of all, that's going to be a motivation for Nigerian youth to say, this bill means my representatives, my leaders believe that I have a say in what happens in this country. It encourages people because one of the issues we have with people with, elections is that indifference. They don't bother to vote. And when you give young people like this a bill, it makes them feel like they have a voice. They're included in what happens in the political process of the country. Now, we are seeing around the world, a 39-year-old got elected in France. That's such a huge move in France, and Nigerians are clamoring for something similar. So if on all levels of government, young people are allowed to participate, and, often people forget about the second part of the Not Too Young to Run bill, which talks about independent candidacy, which now takes out, having to go through the party politics to get a ticket for a certain position. It's going to allow a lot more participation. It's going to allow a lot more people to feel involved. And I think it's going to improve the democratic process in our country.
Well, I agree with you, and I will also want what happened in France to happen in Nigeria. However, we have seen young people voted into office in Nigeria, even though not as the president, but will you say they justified their being in those positions?
Okay, so sometimes I get concerned when people try to compare, people try to group young people as if we're all the same. The performance of certain people who have been in office, because I've heard a lot of different comparisons coming in. People say, okay, so this young person did this, therefore maybe they did something negative, therefore, young people should not do it. And I think that's an unfair comparison. When it comes down to it, if this bill is passed and young people are allowed to participate and run for elective office, they have the chance to prove themselves. Each and every individual has the chance to prove himself, and not just as a young person, but even for older person. The important things are the credibility, and also, if that person is able to communicate their plans for whichever office they want to take. And if they get voted in, I think that they should be allowed to have a clear, foundation, a clear, expectancy, so that they're not being constantly compared to past people who have won within certain age groups. If this happens, more young people will come out, and it will be a chance for each and every person to individually, prove themselves. Like I've always said, it's not necessarily your age that qualifies you, and also it's not your age that should disqualify you. It's up to, your caliber. That is what should qualify you.
Well, Samson, what difference will the youth make when given a seat at the table, be it in policy making or even carrying out developmental projects?
I think it was former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan that said that any country that sidelines its youth severes its lifeline. You can't talk about development, you can't talk about governance without inclusion. And democracy as a concept loses its vitality if you don't include every aspect of your society. That have moved from third worlds to first worlds, or have moved from being underdeveloped, are nations that harnessed the potentials of their youth and converted them to assets. What we have today in our country is a country that continues to recognize its youth as potentials and not as assets. We've not moved from potentials to assets. And there's no way we can develop. Check it. If you look at the Asian Tigers in the 1970s, what did they do? They invested so much in their youthful population because that's your most productive workforce. If you look at America today, if you look at different parts of the world, the whole world and globally have attention on young people. And when you hear youth bulge, the Africa Union is focusing on harnessing the demographic dividend in young people through investment in youth. So if you have a population who are young people, they will determine your development trajectory over the next 50 years.
I'd like to thank the lawmakers for, taking into consideration the Not Too Young to Run bill. It's a huge role that they've played in this, and we keep saying they'll go down in history for it if this passes on. And I would also like to call on all Nigerian youth to join us in Abuja at Unity Fountain at 8 a.m. where we'll be walking down to the National Assembly.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us on the program today. Samson Itodo, thank you for coming. And Mariam Loshi, thank you as well for joining us today. But then that's where we have to leave the conversation. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back with a different topic entirely. Stay with us.